All right, good morning, everybody. Once again, my name is Joyce Omondiwa-Higa, and this is Full Circle with Joyce. We're in the second hour of our show. For those of you who are just joining us, we kicked off at 8 a.m. With lots to talk about today. We were looking at the National Youth Council Bill coming up, being presented on Monday, rather. And so if you missed that, you can look out for the episode on our YouTube channel. But there'll be a repeat from 9 a.m. of the 9 a.m. show at 3 p.m. here on Switch TV. But right now, we want to talk about change makers this Thursday. But before we do, let me share with you our inspirational word for the day. It says, if we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living. I'll read that again. If we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living. And that's by Gail Sheehy. Certainly, life, and you have to be improving on yourself. You have to be working on yourself day by day to be who you want to be and to be able to accomplish the goals that you want to set aside for yourself. And so change, yes, it's very difficult, but certainly a necessary ingredient if you're seeking to grow as an individual, in your career, in your relationships, whatever aspect of life. Change is absolutely critical. What matters is how you handle that change. Okay, so a word of encouragement to all of you watching out there today. Now we want to jump straight into our first segment for the day, and right now we want to talk about educational needs and barriers for refugee students. Joining me in studio, I have Mr. Hamza Egal, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Finance, Planning and Administration at RAF International University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. Now, why did RAF University what was the need behind setting up an institute dealing specifically with these sort of migrant patterns?
Well, the university did not set out just to focus on the communities that can access universities or access education. A university is a hub for everyone, and it has to be inclusive of all our communities, and that's why part of our strategy is to focus on refugees and marginalized communities. So it's just to try and say, as Africans, we have to encompass everyone in the journeys that we take, whether it's business, whether it's education. We've got to draw everybody in. So that's one of the reasons for that. Yeah.
Okay. And so certainly when we're talking about refugee communities, we have a lot of them residing here in Kenya. And it's interesting because we can sort of overlook the fact that they too need education. We focus on everything else, food and shelter and water. But at the end of the day, there are still children in those communities who still have their own futures ahead of them. And so education there would play such a big role. And so there's the African Institute of Refugee and Migration. And when exactly did that, when did that begin? When was it founded?
Okay, so that's a new institution that's being launched. The university is fairly new. We're coming up to 3 years this December.
Okay.
So that institution is a new institution that is actually being set up as we speak.
Okay.
And that was to try and understand, the African context of migration and refugees. What we tend to forget is that refugees are just ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And that's the reality. There's no difference between, you can have lawyers, doctors as refugees. It's just the situation is what is dire.
Yeah.
And as you rightly put, most of the focus when it comes to refugees is humanitarian aid. And that basically means basic needs, basic shelter, food, medicine. Whereas education always takes a back seat in any conflict. Education is the first casualty of the society. So the educational institutions crumble. But the point that now we want to study in terms of now do our research on from an African context using such research institutions is to try and understand how to mitigate, how to respond to these things. Majority of the refugees that we have are young people, extremely young, as you rightly put. We have, people who are, let's say about 50% of refugees children, 50% of 5 to let's say 17, 50% are in school. So that's primary and secondary. But when you come to higher education, and you know that education is what enables you to change your life, its impact is vast. It's greatly underappreciated. So we're looking to say, you know what, as Africans and as people who are conscious, because a lot of my community, the Somali community, are refugees. We have a lot of South Sudanese, the Ethiopians, Eritreans. You've seen what's happening in Libya. So we have these issues in terms of migration and refugees, and it's for us to come up with the solutions. We always look at Eurocentric institutions to try and give us the research and the information. So we want to reclaim that.
Let's talk about that, because it sounds like that is going to be a key cornerstone of this program that you're trying to establish, that you want it to be very Afrocentric and not just looking to solutions, from the West. What are some of those African perspectives that you really want to plug into this program?
Well, first, I think most narratives always talk about empowerment. Most narratives when it comes to refugees, they're always talking about empowerment. These people are empowered people. These people are, they come from all walks of life. So what I would like to see is the narrative changing towards more of how can we assist, advance individuals, even because of their situation, regardless of their situation. Can we advance these people? Can we assist? And it's always been about empowerment. Yes, there are communities that need empowerment. For instance, you have the young women and girls that need empowerment, especially in that kind of environment. But the reality is, in education in general, finance is a barrier. In general, in Africa. So now imagine when it comes to refugees. If in general finance is an issue, if infrastructure is an issue, if trained teachers is an issue in refugee institutions, or in general, what do you think they are in refugee camps? So we need to look at, instead of dividing people, instead of trying to say, let's segregate people along these lines, can we just focus on just education for everyone, access for everyone? And that's something that we're working on. So there has been access. I mean, Kenya is rated as number 8 in the world for giving access, education access. And at the same time, finance is an issue, infrastructure is an issue, equality is an issue. So we have a long way to go, and these institutions that we are developing ourselves would enable us to find solutions and answers.
Okay, so let's dive deeper then into how the RAF, African Institute of Refugee and Migration Program, will now make that education more accessible, that level of education that you want to see more accessible for refugees. So particularly, I'm curious if the plan is to train teachers, is it to work with organizations and train their staff already working in those areas? What do you sort of envision?
I mean, one of the things that we first embarked on was the College of Education. That was one of the first courses or colleges that we established in the university. One, because of the need of the area that we're in. So we're in Kajiado, and Kajiado also has a shortfall when it comes to teachers, especially across different segments. So for instance, early childhood, primary, secondary, special needs, there was a huge gap. Now, in terms of looking at it from the perspective of refugees, the reality is the environments are so harsh that majority of the teachers would not want to go there. And the people that actually end up going to these kind of institutions are not people who are, first of all, given the kind of assistance that they need to be in that harsh environment. So what you have is a lot of movement back and forth, new staff coming in, new staff going, and then you also have very undertrained teaching staff. So we're looking at training teachers, but also one of the main aspects of this institution is, can we get information and can we get the solutions from the refugees? Because they're the ones who are in it. They're the ones who, our element is to come in and say, technically this is viable, this is not. But the ideas and the direction should ultimately come from the people who are in that environment. Yes.
So I imagine then you'd be organizing a lot of barazas and town halls, focus groups to try and gather that information.
A lot of research,
And so when exactly are you hoping to kick off this program? You've said it's currently still in discussion, still in the works.
The hardest thing about setting up research institutions, even within educational institutions, is finding the right people to come together. And I always believe that, you know, if we strive for each other, then we can see a prosperous, more peaceful and cohesive Africa. So it's trying to find the right individuals to plug in, and because research is something that not a lot of people enjoy.
Yeah.
And so finding individuals who love research and love the concept of giving back, and that's where we are. So wish us luck.
Well, good luck to you for sure. There's a question here. How does RAF University financially support the refugee students? And you're saying, hey Joyce, kindly ask the VC, and you're saying kudos for the good job that they are doing. So is there any sort of direct financial engagement?
You know what,
to the refugees?
I can tell you this. We tried a scholarship program, and these are the kind of issues that that come up when you actually try something. And what we realized is you can give someone a scholarship, and then
you were giving the scholarship directly to refugees.
So to the refugees directly. We tried doing this last year.
Okay.
It was an initiative that I undertook personally, but in hindsight, what we didn't realize was that you can give someone a scholarship to come to education, you know, so you're covered in terms of shelter, you're covered in terms of your education. But some of these people are so poor and so, you know, they need certain assistance to the point whereby the student is deciding whether they should eat or whether they should buy toiletries. And then we also had now, you know, being a refugee or being in a refugee camp comes with its own other issues.
Yeah.
So family, you're away from family.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of mental health issues. So you need an entire network or an entire system within even your own educational institution to help these people, because human trafficking is also an issue.
Yeah.
You know, so, and then there's also the fiduciary responsibility that the university is undertaking by bringing these students out of the camps and saying, you know what, they're coming to this education institution, and then there's no backup support.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's, it was one of those things that you learn.
Yeah.
So you leap because of you want to do good, you leap, and then you find out that, you know, you probably do more damage than good because you're not filling all the gaps.
And even just the socialization. I mean, being in a refugee camp and then coming and living in a city, studying in a city, it's like night and day.
And that not being able to move. So for instance, if you're a refugee and you're being told, okay, you've been allowed to go to university, you're told to stay within the proximity of the university. You can't move about. So the social element is out. And the most important thing is the finance. You can give education, you can give opportunities for education, but these people also need other assistance in terms of now their living standards.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Hamza, we'll be looking forward to seeing this program come to bear. And thank you again for joining me here on Full Circle
Pleasure's
with
all
Joyce.
mine.
Of course, Hamza Egal, he's the Deputy Vice Chancellor at RAF University, and he's responsible for finance, planning and administration, refugee, educational needs and their barriers. Interesting discussion right here on Full Circle with Joyce. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about drug abuse and gender-based violence, and how one guy is trying to use, or this organization is trying to use art to address that issue. Stay tuned.